The Atlantic drowned an aristocrat. Years later, a butcher from London's slums showed up claiming to be him. He was obese, illiterate. He could not speak a word of French. He did not know the layout of his supposed childhood home. A grieving mother looked him in the eye and said, "That is my son." She was wrong, and she did not care. The Atlantic does not return what it takes. That is the first rule of the sea, and in April of 1854, the sea took Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne without apology. He was 25, slim, dark-haired, educated in the Jesuit halls of Stonyhurst College and the parlors of Paris, where he had spent enough of his youth to speak French as fluently as English. He held a commission in the 6th Dragoon Guards. He bore tattoos on his arms. He was the eldest son of the Tichborne baronetcy, the heir to a Hampshire estate that stretched across rolling countryside and carried with it a fortune most families could not dream of in 10 lifetimes. And he was running from a broken heart. Roger had proposed marriage to his cousin, Catherine Doughty. She refused. Wounded and restless, he set out to travel the world, boarding a merchant vessel called the Bella, bound from Rio de Janeiro to Kingston, Jamaica. The ship never arrived. Somewhere in the open Atlantic, the Bella went down. A handful of survivors were pulled from the wreckage days later. Roger was not among them. The sea closed over him. The world moved on. But his mother did not. Lady Henriette Tichborne, born in Paris, fiercely Catholic, and possessed of a grief that only sharpened with the years, refused to believe her son was dead. She rejected the official reports. She dismissed the insurance settlements. She placed advertisements in newspapers across the British Empire and beyond, offering rewards for any information about Roger's survival. Year after year, the same plea circulated through colonial ports and foreign capitals. A mother calling into the void, waiting for the void to answer. And then, 12 years later, it did. From the sunburned town of Wagga Wagga in New South Wales, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Lady Tichborne. The handwriting was crude, the spelling fractured, the grammar of a man who had barely seen the inside of a schoolroom. It claimed to be from her son, and it misspelled the family name. Lady Henriette read every word. And she believed. Somewhere in the Australian outback, a man who called himself Thomas Castro had seen one of those advertisements. He was a butcher by trade. He was enormous. He knew nothing of Stonyhurst, nothing of Paris, nothing of the 6th Dragoon Guards. But he knew what a fortune looked like from the outside, and he understood perhaps better than anyone that grief does not ask for proof. It asks only for permission to hope. He began writing, and an empire began to listen. The man who would steal one of England's greatest fortunes was born with nothing worth remembering. Arthur Orton entered the world on the 20th of March, 1834, in Wapping, a stretch of East London where the Thames ran thick with sewage and the air tasted of salt, tar, and slaughterhouse blood. He was one of 12 children born to a shipping butcher. The family lived above the shop. The neighborhood was brutal, overcrowded, and utterly forgettable. So was Arthur. He received almost no formal education. He could barely write his own name. What he learned with his hands: how to cut meat, haul cargo, survive. By his teenage years, he had gone to sea to Orton, drifting through merchant vessels and foreign ports the way young men of his class often did, not out of ambition, but out of the simple need to eat. He sailed to South America. He washed up eventually in Australia. By the early 1860s, Arthur Orton had settled in Wagga Wagga, a dusty pastoral town in New South Wales, where he lived under the name Thomas Castro. He worked as a butcher and slaughterhouse hand. He drank. He drifted. He married a local woman. He was, by every measure, unremarkable. A heavy man with a Cockney tongue, living a small life on the far edge of the British Empire, where nobody asked too many questions about where you came from. Now hold that portrait in your mind, because here is the man he claimed to be. Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne was everything Arthur Orton was not. Born into one of the oldest Catholic families in England, Roger was raised partly in Paris by his French mother. He spoke fluent French with a Parisian accent. He was educated at Stonyhurst College, the elite Jesuit boarding school in Lancashire, where he studied classics and theology. He was slim, refined, and carried himself with the quiet certainty of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. Roger held a commission in the 6th Dragoon Guards. He bore distinctive tattoos on his left arm. He had a thin and rectangular face, and the build of a man raised on horseback rather than behind a butcher's block. Two men, born the same year, in the same city, under the same monarch. One raised in drawing rooms and Jesuit libraries, the other in the blood and grime of a whopping slaughterhouse. They shared no accent, no education, no physique, no markings on the skin. Not a single thread connected them. And yet, within a few years, one would walk into the other's life and convince a grieving mother, 100 witnesses, and half of England that they were the same person. The question is not how he did it. The question is what made an ordinary butcher in a forgotten Australian town look at a dead aristocrat's name and think, that could be me. Or something shifted in Arthur Orton, and what followed would consume a nation. She had not seen her son in over a decade, and when the wrong man walked into the room, she called him Roger. The meeting took place in 1866 in a hotel in Paris. Lady Henriette Tichborne had arranged it herself after months of correspondence with the man writing from Australia. She insisted the room be kept dim, the curtains drawn. Whether this was to ease her fragile health or to soften the details of the man standing before her, no one can say for certain. What we do know is this: the man who entered that room bore almost no resemblance to her lost son. Roger Tichborne had been slender, angular, and carried himself with the posture of a military officer. The claimant was enormous. Roger had spoken fluent French from childhood, yet the claimant could not manage a single sentence. Roger had attended Stonyhurst College and could discuss theology, literature, and classical languages. The claimant struggled with basic grammar and could barely write a legible letter. Roger bore tattoos on his left arm. The claimant's skin was bare. He fumbled the names of family members. He misidentified rooms in the Tichborne estate. He confused key details of Roger's childhood. When pressed on specifics, he became vague or changed the subject, and Lady Henriette embraced him. She declared publicly and without hesitation that this was her son. She granted him an allowance of £1,000, an extraordinary sum, enough to live like a gentleman. She wrote to relatives instructing them to welcome Roger home. She silenced those who raised doubts. She became, in every sense, the foundation on which the entire fraud rested. The question that haunted the courtroom years later, and still haunts historians today, is simply, why? Some have argued she was mentally unwell, that years of grief had eroded her ability to distinguish reality from desire. Others have pointed out that Lady Henriette had always been at odds with the Tichborne family. She was French, Catholic, and never felt accepted by her husband's English relatives. Recognizing this claimant meant the fortune would flow through her, not through the family she despised. Grief and spite, it turns out, can walk hand in hand. But perhaps the most unsettling explanation is the simplest one. She wanted her son back, and when the world offered her a man, any man, who was willing to say the words she had waited 12 years to hear, she chose to believe. But not because the evidence supported it, but because the alternative was to accept, finally and permanently, that Roger was dead, that the sea had taken him, and that no amount of searching would bring him back. She never wavered, not once. Not even when friends quietly warned her. Not even when the contradictions mounted. Lady Henriette Tichborne died in March of 1868, still calling the claimant her son. And with her death, the only person whose belief had held the illusion together was gone. Now the family wanted blood. For 2 years, a butcher from Wapping lived as an aristocrat, and the strangest part is how many people helped him do it. With Lady Henriette's allowance flowing and her public endorsement shielding him, the claimant settled into the life of Sir Roger Tichborne, as though stepping into a coat left hanging by the door. He visited the Tichborne estate. He walked the grounds. He dined with members of the gentry who had known the real Roger as a boy. He spent freely, carried himself with the blunt confidence of a man who believed his own performance, and began assembling something no ordinary fraud could manufacture: witnesses. Over 100 of them. Former servants, old acquaintances, tenants on the estate. One by one, they looked at this enormous, cockney-voiced man and swore he was the lost heir. Some were elderly, their memories clouded by time. Others may have had financial reasons to support the claim. A few simply could not bring themselves to contradict a grieving mother. But taken together, they formed a wall of testimony that made the claimant appear legitimate. He was not a careful imposter. He made errors constantly. He confused the names of Roger's school friends. He could not recall basic geography of the Tichborne estate. He knew nothing of the military regiment Roger had served in. When asked about his years in France, he offered only silence or clumsy deflections. Yet for every mistake, there was a believer ready to explain it away. Memory fades after trauma, they said. The sea changes a man. Suffering abroad could account for the weight, the accent, the gaps. It was not the quality of the lie that sustained him. It was the quantity of people willing to defend it. But not everyone was willing. The Tichborne family, those who stood to inherit the fortune if Roger remained legally dead, watched the claimant with cold and accumulating fury. They cataloged every contradiction. They noted his bare arms where tattoos should have been. They observed his total inability to speak French. They saw a stranger consuming their inheritance and wearing a dead man's name like a costume. They waited. And in March of 1868, Lady Henriette died. Her death changed everything. She had been the claimant's shield, the one person whose emotional authority had kept the family from acting. Without her, there was nothing standing between the imposter and the full force of the Tichborne legal machinery. The family moved swiftly. They prepared to challenge his identity in court, to strip him of the name, the allowance, and the life he had built on borrowed grief. But the claimant did not retreat. He did not vanish back to Australia. Instead, he did the one thing no one expected. He sued them. He filed a civil action to claim the entire Tichborne baronetcy and fortune, as though daring the courts to prove he was not who he said he was. The audacity was breathtaking, and England could not look away. On a spring morning in 1871, the Court of Common Pleas opened its doors to what would become the longest trial England had ever seen. and at its center sat a man who could not remember his own supposed childhood. The claimant's civil case to secure the Tichborne baronetcy began in May. It would not end until March of the following year. 102 days of testimony, cross-examination, and spectacle that consumed the nation, the way only scandal can. London treated it like theater. Newspapers printed daily transcripts. The crowds gathered outside the courthouse hoping for seats. Vendors sold pamphlets and portraits of the claimant. Public opinion fractured along class lines before the first witness was even sworn in. But inside the courtroom, the drama was slower, more surgical, and far more devastating. The claimant's legal team opened with confidence. They paraded witness after witness, over 100 in total, each one swearing that the heavy, Cockney-speaking man before the court was Sir Roger Tichborne. Old servants testified they recognized his walk. Former neighbors claimed his eyes were unmistakable. A retired soldier insisted the claimant was the same officer he had served alongside in the Dragoons. It was an impressive wall of human certainty, and the Tichborne family's lawyers dismantled it brick by brick. The cross-examination was merciless. The claimant was asked about Stonyhurst College, where Roger had spent years. He could not name a single teacher. He was asked about his time in the Dragoon Guards. He confused basic military terms. He was asked to speak French. He sat in silence. He was asked about the tattoos Roger had carried on his left arm. He claimed they had faded. Medical experts testified that tattoos of that kind do not simply vanish. Then came the evidence the defense had been dreading. The Tichborne legal team produced records tracing the claimant's real identity. Shipping logs showed a man named Arthur Orton departing London for Australia. Witnesses from Wapping identified the claimant as the same boy who had grown up above his father's butcher shop. Former employers in Wagga Wagga confirmed he had lived there under the name Thomas Castro, working as a butcher, not recovering from a shipwreck. The claimant's story unraveled in public, slowly and completely. His supporters in the gallery grew quieter with each passing week. His legal team struggled to counter evidence that was not circumstantial, but documentary, traced in ink across shipping manifests and parish records. After 102 days, the jury delivered its verdict. Non-suit. The claimant's case was thrown out. He was not Roger Tichborne. He had no claim to the estate, the baronetcy, or the name. But the courtroom defeat was only the beginning. The Crown had been watching, and what they saw was not a failed inheritance claim. It was perjury on a scale never before attempted in a British court. Before the claimant could leave the building, he was arrested. The courts called him a liar. The streets called him a martyr. And for a brief, volatile moment, it seemed like England might tear itself apart trying to decide which was true. What happened after the civil trial's collapse was something no one in the British establishment had anticipated. Instead of fading into disgrace, the claimant became more famous than ever, not as a convicted fraud, but as a symbol. A working-class man crushed by aristocratic power. A common Englishman who had dared to reach above his station and been slapped down by the very system designed to keep people like him in place. The movement was swift and fierce. Tichbornite societies sprang up in industrial cities across the country. Factory workers, dockmen, laborers, and tradespeople pooled their pennies to fund the claimant's legal defense. Rallies drew thousands. Pamphlets circulated in pubs and union halls, portraying the claimant as a victim of judicial conspiracy. In some towns, riots broke out. The police were called to disperse crowds chanting the name of a man the courts had already exposed. It was not rational. It did not need to be. Victorian England was a nation held together by the rigid architecture of class. You were born into your station, and you stayed there. The aristocracy controlled the land, the courts, the government. For millions of ordinary people, the system was a locked door with no key. And here was a man, whatever his real name, who had walked through that door and sat at the table. The establishment had removed him, but the act of removing him only proved what the working class already suspected, that justice in England belonged to those who already owned everything else. But the claimant, whether by instinct or by calculation, leaned into the role. He gave speeches. He appeared at public gatherings. He presented himself not as a man fighting for a fortune, but as a man fighting for fairness. The fact that he was almost certainly Arthur Orton, a butcher's son from Wapping, only deepened the appeal. He was one of them. His fight was their fight. If the courts could erase his identity, they could erase anyone's. Historians have debated ever since whether the Tichborneite movement was genuine class consciousness or simply misplaced rage looking for a figurehead. The truth is probably both. People did not rally behind the claimant because the evidence supported him. They rallied because the evidence did not matter. What mattered was what he represented. The possibility that the walls between rich and poor were not as permanent as those in power wanted everyone to believe. But belief, no matter how passionate, does not stop the machinery of the law. The Crown had charged Arthur Orton with perjury. The criminal trial was set to begin. And this time, there would be no sympathetic mother, no civil courtroom technicalities, and no escape. The state was coming for him, and it intended to make an example. 188 days. That is how long it took the British Crown to destroy a man who had already been unmasked, and still half the country refused to accept the outcome. The criminal trial for perjury began in 1873, and from its first session, it was clear this would not be a replay of the civil case. Yet the civil trial had been a contest between two claims. This was a prosecution. The Crown was not asking whether the claimant might be Roger Tichborne. The Crown was stating, with the full weight of the state behind it, that he was Arthur Orton, and that every word he had spoken under oath was a deliberate lie. The case the prosecution built was exhaustive. They produced former employers from Wapping, who identified the claimant as the boy who had apprenticed in his father's butcher shop. They traced shipping records that followed Orton's journey from London to South America, to Australia. They found residents of Wagga Wagga who knew him as Tom Castro, a man who had never once mentioned the name Tichborne until the advertisements appeared. They presented handwriting analysis, physical measurements, and medical testimony confirming the absence of tattoos that the real Roger had carried to his grave, wherever that grave may be. The defense fought back, but with diminishing force. The claimant's barristers attempted to discredit individual witnesses, to argue that memory is unreliable, that colonial records were incomplete. They leaned heavily on the testimony of those 100+ supporters who still insisted the claimant was genuine. But under cross-examination, that wall of certainty crumbled. Witnesses contradicted each other. Timelines collapsed. Stories that had sounded convincing in the civil trial now sounded rehearsed. The claimant himself was his own worst enemy on the stand. He grew evasive under pressure. He contradicted earlier testimony. He could not account for gaps in his story that stretched across years. But the man who had once charmed drawing rooms and rallied working-class crowds now sat sweating in the dock, visibly shrinking beneath the precision of the prosecution's case. In February of 1874, after 188 days, the jury returned its verdict: guilty of perjury. The sentence: 14 years of hard labor. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was volcanic. Crowds who had gathered in the freezing streets wept openly. Tichbornites raged against what they called a ruling class conspiracy to silence one of their own. Pamphlets appeared within hours, denouncing the verdict as proof that English justice served only the wealthy. In several cities, public gatherings turned hostile, and authorities braced for unrest. Inside the courtroom, Arthur Orton was led away in chains. Just the man who had dined with aristocrats, commanded headlines, and split a nation in two was now a convicted criminal heading to prison. But even chains could not settle the question that had haunted England for nearly a decade, because thousands still believed him, and belief, once rooted, does not obey a verdict. He entered prison as the most famous man in England. He walked out 10 years later, and no one was waiting. Arthur Orton was released in 1884, his sentence reduced for good behavior. He had served a decade of hard labor. The man who emerged was thinner than the one who had gone in, but still carried the bulk of a body shaped by years of excess before the cell door closed. His health was broken. His notoriety, once white-hot, had cooled to a faint curiosity. The England he returned to had moved on. At the Tichbornite societies that had once rallied thousands had quietly dissolved. The penny subscriptions had dried up. The pamphlets had yellowed and been swept away. New scandals had taken the front pages. New injustices had captured the public imagination. The claimant, who had once divided a nation, now struggled to fill a room. He tried to survive on what remained of his name. He toured music halls, appearing on stage as a living relic, the infamous Tichborne claimant in the flesh. Audiences came at first, drawn by the ghost of scandal. But the act wore thin quickly. There was no new story to tell, only the old one repeated to smaller and smaller crowds. He sold a confession to a newspaper, admitting he was Arthur Orton and that the entire claim had been a forgery. Then, almost immediately, he retracted it, and insisting once again that he was Sir Roger Tichborne. Whether this reversal was genuine delusion, a desperate attempt to revive public interest, or simply the reflex of a man who had lived inside a lie so long he no longer knew where it ended, and he began, remains one of the case's quieter mysteries. The money vanished. The music halls stopped booking him. He drifted through lodging houses in the poorer quarters of London, the same narrow streets where he had been born 60 years earlier. The arc of his life had bent into a circle, whopping to Wagga Wagga to the courtrooms of the Empire and back again, ending where it started, in poverty, in anonymity, in the kind of silence that swallows ordinary men whole. He married again during these years. He took odd work where he could find it. He grew ill. The details of his final years are sparse, recorded in fragments, because no one was paying attention anymore. On the 1st of April, 1898, Arthur Orton died in a cramped London room. He was 64 years old. The date, April Fool's Day, was a coincidence almost too precise to be believed. His coffin bore a brass plate. On it, at his own request, was inscribed the name Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne. Even in death, he would not let go of the man he had pretended to be. Or perhaps, after 30 years of living between two identities, he no longer knew which one was the pretense. The lie outlasted the liar. But the story was not finished. A convicted fraud died in obscurity. And then, thousands showed up to mourn him as though he were royalty. On a gray April morning in 1898, yet the coffin of Arthur Orton was carried through the streets of Paddington. He had died penniless, forgotten by the newspapers, abandoned by the courts that had twice made him their centerpiece. By every rational measure, his story was over. The con had been exposed. The The sentence served. The man reduced to nothing. But the streets told a different story. Working-class Londoners lined the route in numbers that stunned even the police. They stood shoulder to shoulder along the pavements, filling side streets and leaning from windows. Men removed their hats. Women wept openly. The procession stretched far longer than anyone had planned for, swelling with mourners who had walked across the city to be there. These were not people with any connection to the Tichborne estate. They had never set foot in Hampshire, or they had no claim to the baronetcy, no but interest in the legal technicalities that had consumed 2 courtrooms and nearly 300 combined days of testimony. They came because of what the claimant meant to them, not who he was, but what he represented. For the working poor of Victorian England, Arthur Orton's story was not a fraud. It was a parable. A man from their world had reached into the world above and taken a seat that was never meant for him. The powerful had crushed him for it. The courts had convicted him. Prison had broken his health. And still, even dead, his name carried a charge that no verdict could neutralize. The coffin plate read, Sir Roger Charles Doughty Tichborne. The mourners knew it was a fiction. Most of them had probably always known. But they honored it anyway. And because the fiction pointed at something real, a system in which your birth determined your worth, and any man who challenged that system, even through deception, deserved to be remembered. Historians have struggled to classify the Tichborne claimant ever since. He was not a criminal mastermind. His deception was clumsy, riddled with errors that a more careful impostor would never have made. He was not a political revolutionary. He had no ideology beyond self-interest. He was not even a particularly gifted liar. The evidence against him was overwhelming from the start, and yet he held an entire nation's attention for the better part of a decade. He inspired loyalty that survived 2 trials, a prison sentence, and his own death. Yet he became a mirror in which Victorian England saw its deepest fracture, the line between those who were born to inherit and those who were born to serve. The real Roger Tichborne vanished beneath the Atlantic in 1854. Arthur Orton vanished into him. And in the end, neither man survived whole. Only the question they left behind, hanging in the air above a crowded funeral procession, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Who gets to decide who you are? Arthur Orton has been dead for over a century, and we are still telling his story. That alone should tell you something about the wound he opened. The Tichborne case did not end with a funeral procession. It reshaped English law. The combined length of both trials, nearly 300 days, forced the judiciary to reconsider how cases were managed and how evidence was weighed. The legal scholars cite the Tichborne trials as a turning point in procedural reform. Identity fraud was elevated into a category of crime the courts took seriously enough to prosecute at extraordinary expense. But the law was only the surface layer. Beneath it, something deeper had shifted. The Tichborne claimant exposed a fracture in Victorian society that neither trial could repair. Who deserved wealth? Who deserved a name? Who deserved to be believed? Those were not legal questions. They were political ones. And the Tichborneite movement proved that millions of ordinary people had been carrying those questions silently for years, waiting for something to bring them into the open. The case haunted writers for generations. Anthony Trollope drew on it for his novel Is He Popenjoy, published just 4 years after the verdict. Josephine Tay reimagined the imposter's psychology in her classic mystery, Brat Farrar. And in 2023, Zadie Smith placed the Tichborne case at the center of her best-selling novel, The Fraud. bringing Arthur Orton back into public conversation nearly 150 years after he first walked into a Parisian hotel room and let a grieving mother call him her son. The Tichborne estate still stands in Hampshire. The baronetcy continues. The parish records of Wapping still hold the baptism entry for Arthur Orton, born 1834, son of a shipping butcher. 2 lives, separated by everything Victorian England used to measure a man. And yet, for a few extraordinary years, one consumed the other so completely that an empire could not tell them apart. Perhaps that is the real lesson. But not that Arthur Orton was a gifted liar, because he was not. Not that the system failed, because eventually it corrected itself. But that identity, in a world built on rigid categories of class and birth, is far more fragile than those in power would like to admit. The most dangerous man in Victorian England was not the one with the title. It was the one everyone wanted to believe had come back from the dead. Right now, there is someone living under a name that does not belong to them. Someone sitting in a family they were never born into. And someone, somewhere, suspects the truth, but is too afraid to say it out loud. These stories do not stay in the past. They walk among us. If that thought unsettles you, click the like button and remember to join our community by subscribing to the channel.